Thank you very much. And welcome to Plymouth University, welcome to the Roland Levinsky building, and welcome to this evening's CogTalk, which is on the topic of fairness. There are few parents who have not had on one occasion or another a child of theirs saying, "It's not fair." And there are a number of possible responses to this, including the response that life isn't fair, a rather grumpy response that life isn't fair. And yet, although that may or may not be true, do come down. There's plenty of seats down in the front. I'll just give these people time to come on down. Do not be shy, do not stand up. It's not good for you to stand up when you could lounge around. Oh gosh, health and safety, what a lot of trouble we get into. So instead of being grumpy, of course, you could provide a rationale. But the reality is that we would like life to be fair, and the concept of fairness is very much built not only into our society, but into our interactions with life. If you don't eat your bar of chocolate now, it's fair that you should have it later, isn't it? If someone takes it, it's unfair. And this idea of fairness, which we have not just with ourselves, but with society as a whole, it imbues not only us, but our literature. We always like the good guy to win, don't we? Because that's fair. We want the nice guy to get the girl in the end, not the nasty guy. And it's also part of religious beliefs. If you're good, you'll go to heaven. If you're bad, you'll go to hell. And if you're good, you'll be born next life as a prince. And if you're bad, you'll become an earthworm. Everything is fair, and what may appear unfair in this life, don't worry, it'll all be fair in the next. So fairness is something which is extremely important in our thinking. And this evening we've got two speakers with slightly different views. Michaela is going to start by telling us, I haven't introduced the speakers, have I? I normally do that. To discuss this very important topic this evening, we have John Bird, founder of The Big Issue, and Dr. Michaela Gummerum, who is a lecturer in psychology and specialising in the development of the concept of fairness in children and its role in society. So I'm going to start by asking Michaela to explain to us why it is that fairness is good for you. Michaela.
Yes, I just have to turn this on so you can actually hear me and my brilliant arguments. Can you hear me in the back?
Yeah.
No?
Yes.
Yes, no. Okay. Excellent. Michael, you actually stole my introduction because I wanted to start this presentation with a show of hands. So you have to do something now. Show of hands. Who here has children? Raise your hands. Okay, almost everybody. Who here has siblings? Who here is maybe a teacher or educator or something like that? Yeah, quite a few as well. So I think almost everybody raised their hands at one point or another. And that means that you have heard that statement, "It's not fair," at least once in your life. You might have used it at least once in your life. I kind of use it on a weekly basis at least. And we use that statement to kind of point out when things are not good for us, or when things are not good for a group of people that we are associating with. And it works really, really well. If my students tell me it's not fair, I try to make things better for them. Because if they think it's not fair, that's not good for me. If my spouse says it's not fair, I try to not make him more angry. So fairness sells. Fairness is important. Fairness is so important, I would say, that even politicians use it to sell policies to us. Has anybody here watched the party conference season, broadcast from the party conference season? I think it was in September sometime. Anybody at all? No, I didn't watch it either. Oh, two people. Very good. Well, I didn't watch it either, but actually I made two of my students watch the speeches of David Cameron, Ed Miliband, and Nick Clegg to see whether they actually talk about fairness and whether fairness was important in their speeches. And this is some of the clips that they found. I hope you can hear it okay.
Why should my taxes go to people who could work but don't? Or to those who live in homes that hard-working people could never afford? Or to people who have no right to be here in the first place? And I say this to the British people. You have every right to be angry about a system that is unfair and unjust, and that is why we're sorting it out.
Take the gas and electric companies. We need successful energy companies in Britain. We need them to invest for the future. But you need to get a fair deal. And frankly, there will never be public consent for that investment unless you do get a fair deal.
We are the only party that can finish the job of economic recovery, but finish it fairly. The only party able to build a stronger economy and a fairer society too.
Okay. Do you think fairness sells votes? Well, these people probably think so. So, they try to sell us their propositions by saying they're fair, or they try to make unfair things better. Now, if you listen really closely to their statements, you probably realize that they use fairness in slightly different ways. So fairness means different things to different people. Fairness, can mean something like that. Equal pay for equal work, everybody getting what they deserve in terms of their contribution. Fairness can also mean something like that. Not paying for people who don't pull their weight. So lazy people, skibbers, shouldn't actually get a fair deal in our society. I like this cartoon very much because it kind of shows the difference between more conservatively minded people and more left-wing people. Conservatives might say, yeah, maybe we should care for equality of opportunity, but what everybody does with their equal share is up to them. Maybe more liberal people would say, yeah, but we start out differently, and people who didn't get a fair chance in life, the short ones here should actually get more than the tall ones. So when we talk about fairness as researchers, as social scientists, and as natural scientists, we kind of have to define what we're talking about as well when we talk about fairness. And there are different ways to look at fairness. One way is to look at the fairness of distribution. So how do you fairly distribute goods and bads in society? Material goods like money, salary, but also symbolic goods like education, trust, something like that. It's also about the distribution of bads. We all know we're living in a time of austerity, so we're not giving a lot to people, but we're taking away from people. How do we do that in a fair way? This is a big topic at the moment. Fairness is also part of our social relationships, how we interact with other people, how we exchange benefits and costs. So you all came here to get the benefit of a probably very interesting debate about fairness, but you didn't actually have to pay entrance fee, that would be a cost, but you have to pay attention, you have to engage with us, this would be your cost. So we engage in these social exchanges or social contracts very, very often. The last type of fairness scientists look at is fairness of retributions. So if you get harmed, if something of yours gets damaged, how do we pay for these damages? What would be a fair deal to give back to you? Or if you have achieved something really special, what would be a good salary, a good remuneration? This is something that we talk about when we discuss CEO wages or bankers' wages. Do they actually deserve what they contribute to society? Now, I cannot talk about all these fairness things today, because then I would be talking for 2 hours and Sue would be really, really mad with me. But I'm going to talk today about the fairness of distributions. And what I want you to take away from this today is that people, humans, and sometimes some non-humans, care deeply about fair distributions. We care very deeply about it even when we're very young, when we're children. And we care so much about it that sometimes we're actually willing to pay a cost to achieve fair outcomes. Now, I'm going to do an experiment with you now. This is a task that people who look at fairness and fair distributions do with their study participants. It has been developed by economists. And just imagine you are taking part on this experiment and you are this person. So, I'm giving you this task. You're interacting with an anonymous person. You don't see who this person is. You don't talk to this person. You don't know who this person is. You will never meet this person. You interact only once, And your task is to decide to distribute 20 pounds. I'm putting them here on the table, 20 1-pound coins. And your task is to distribute these 20 pounds between yourself and this other anonymous person. Now here's the trick, the other person can only accept your distribution. You can distribute however you like, you can give 0, you can give 20, you can give 15. The other person can only accept what you have decided. Now is anybody brave enough to tell me their decision? How would you distribute these 20 pounds? Yeah?
10 pounds.
10 pounds to the other person. 10 pounds each. Anything else? You give all of it? You give all 20?
Just to balance that, I give none.
You give none? Okay. I didn't instruct him to say that. So we have 50-50, we have all, we have 0. Anything in between? What do you think is the most common distribution? 50-50. Any other opinions here? Depends on their circumstances, but I'm not telling you anything about the other person. Nothing at all. Yes. So if this person needs it, maybe you would give everything. But I'm not telling you anything about this person. In this circumstance, what do you think? What would you do? Small donation. Okay. So, but again, my question: what do you think is the most common distribution? Who thinks 50-50? Okay, the majority. You're very good. Please do participate in my research in the future, because you are right. Most people give 50-50. So this is on the x-axis, you see how many coins people give to the other person. And here you see on the y-axis the percentage. And I think you see at first glance, most people give 10. They do give 50-50. Some people give a bit less, so make a small donation. But very, very few people actually give 0. There are also not that many that give more than 50-50. And maybe I should have mentioned that, maybe I did. These 20 pounds are real. They're not hypothetical. They are actually lying there in front of you, and you get the money that you distribute to yourself, and the other person gets the money that you distribute to them. Now this has been super surprising, especially for economists, because economists actually always think bad about people. They don't think that other people are fair or pro-social or nice to others. And they were thinking, maybe it's because 20 pounds is actually not that much money, right? I mean, it's a nice amount of money, it buys a couple of drinks in the pub, but it's not that much in the end. It buys a big issue a few times, exactly. Okay, excellent. I think your question might be for John, actually. Okay, good. So, what happens now if you give people actually a lot of money to distribute? You give them 1,000 pounds or 10,000 pounds. Would that change? Would people still give 50% of all that money to the other person that they don't know? Now, we cannot do that here in the UK because our funding agencies don't give us that much money to distribute in experiments. But one very smart economist, this is not David Cameron, but Lindsay Cameron, she went to Indonesia. And at that time in Indonesia, when you brought Western currencies like dollars, that was actually worth a lot of money. So what she did in Indonesia is she did the same experiment that you've seen before. She had a small amount of money to distribute, $10, I think those are 2,000 rupees. And in another condition, people were distributing 200,000 rupees. And at that time in Indonesia, that was 3 times the average monthly salary in Indonesia. So actually quite a lot of money. So imagine 3 times your monthly salary, and you are asked to distribute that between yourself and another person. Now this is what happens. This is the small amount, the 2,000 rupees. Actually here the majority of people gave slightly less than 50%, but still quite a few gave 50%. Now what do you think happens with a large amount of money? Do they give more or do they give less? Less.
More.
Well, actually you are right. They give more. So these are the red bars here. And what you can see is that even when people distribute can distribute a lot of money between themselves and the other person, 3 months' salary, for me it's a huge amount of money, they actually, most of them, give half to the other. So how can we explain that? Well, economists, psychologists would say what humans have is what they call inequity aversion. It's this almost this visceral, really negative aversion to unequal outcomes. We have this, we really strive for making things equal when we distribute resources and when we distribute bats. And when there are unequal distributions, we feel really, really, really uncomfortable with this. We feel uncomfortable when we get less than half or less than other people in society, but we also feel uncomfortable if we get more than half or more than other people in society. You see what this is called, disadvantageous inequity aversion. I cannot even pronounce it. It's such a complicated term. So people feel uncomfortable if they get less than half, and they feel uncomfortable if they get more than half. And these experiments from the US, from the UK, from Indonesia might indicate that this actually exists in humans. Now, if you want to know whether something is part of human nature, you actually have to look at younger kids. So do we find inequity aversion in young kids as well? Now, this is a study that was done in the US with preschool children, 3 to 5-year-olds. And in this experiment, 2 kids are coming to the lab, and they helped the experimenter clean the lab. So it was a bit messy, so they cleared away the blocks. And after the experiment, the children got some rewards for the help. But these rewards were distributed unequally. So there was 1 sticker for Sally, and 1 sticker for Anne, 2 stickers for Sally, 2 stickers for Anne, 3 stickers for Sally, and 4 stickers for Sally. Now the question was, how do kids react to that? Now, question for you, who do you think reacts more? The child who gets less or the child who gets more? Less. Child who gets less, absolutely. And the child who gets less reacts actually really massively. I don't have a movie here, but I mean, they look really sad. I'm trying to act that here. They might say, hey, or that's not fair. Or some of them even try to nick a sticker from the other child. So they do react to this unfair distribution. And they do that when they're very young. So 3-year-olds do that already. Now, a very similar study, one of my favorite studies actually on fairness, was also done with primates. In this study by Sarah Brosnan and Franz de Waal, I think I have to turn on the light a little bit so you can see that. They did exactly the same thing with capuchin monkeys. And in this experimental setup, the monkey had to do some tasks. So the experimenter, as you will see, threw a stone in the cage. The monkey had to give back the stone, and the monkey got a reward for that. And in one condition, the left monkey got cucumbers, but the right monkey got grapes. And like for us, capuchin monkeys like grapes much, much more than cucumbers. So actually, the left monkey here got a bit shortchanged. Now see what happens, how this monkey reacts. Let's see whether I can, yeah. I think it gets a bit darker. I hope you can see that. So he's giving back the stone, gets a cucumber. He's giving the stone. Gets a grape. The left one sees that, really wants that grape as well. But gets a cucumber. Now watch what happens. It gets really angry now. Doesn't want to play anymore at first. Nah, I'm not going to do that anymore. Doesn't even taste the cucumber anymore. Okay, inequity aversion in capuchin monkeys, equal pay for equal work. That's even true for capuchin monkeys. Now, that might actually be not that surprising. It's not surprising that people actually get annoyed when they get less than others, or less than half. But the real interesting question is, what happens if you get more than others? And that's the real test of fairness. If you can get more than the other person, or more than half, would you try to react to that? Would you try to make things more equal? And in this study, I showed you that before, it says unequal distribution in kids. Do you think the child who got more reacted at all?
Yes.
Yes? What would this child... Yeah, sorry?
Share the stickers.
Share the stickers. Yes, some of those children share the stickers. Some children also look really sad. They also look at the other child's pile. So they do show some emotional reaction. They also might say, oh, that's not fair. But interestingly, this happens a bit later in development. So 3-year-old children wouldn't do that, but 5-year-olds would. So it seems that this advantageous inequity aversion, feeling uncomfortable when you get something more, might emerge a little bit later in development than when you get being annoyed when you get less than others. I do need to speed up. I got the sign. I have 2 more slides, and then I'll be done. So I think what I told you so far is that people care about fairness, or they at least care about equal distributions. And they feel happy when everything is equal. Now the question is, if we live in societies where things are equal, that's good for us. But what happens if we live in societies where things are unequal, where we have the feeling that some people consistently get more than others for no reason whatsoever? And this is kind of a topic that has been looked at by Wilkinson and Pickett. I don't know whether anybody has read The Spirit Level. Yes, a couple of people. What they did is they looked at whether people or whether unequal societies are more or less healthy than equal societies. And by health of a nation, they looked at very medical indicators like infant mortality, life expectancy, maternal death, but also more soft indicators like do people trust each other, what is the obesity rate, what are crime rates in societies. And they looked at that, as I said, in equal and unequal societies, and they measured inequality by looking what is the difference between the salary of the 20% richest people and the salary of the 20% poorest people in this society. Now they did a lot of research, and what you read in their books, what you find is these sort of graphs. What you see here on the x-axis is income inequality. On the right it's high. On the left it's low. So on this corner here are countries that are more equal. In this corner here are countries that are more unequal. On the y-axis you see life expectancy in years. The higher, the older people get on average in the society. Now what this graph shows, and as I said, this is an example, they looked at many other indicators as well, is that in more equal societies, people live longer than in unequal societies. They showed that for trust, people in equal societies trust each other more than people in unequal societies. There's lower teenage pregnancy rates in equal societies than in unequal societies, maybe indicating that fairness or equality is good for the health of societies. I'm done. You don't have to wave at me anymore. These are my take-home messages. So hopefully what I've showed you tonight is that people are actually very fair, even when they have to pay a cost, even when they have to give away quite a lot of money, or can give away quite a lot of money. And even young children and capuchin monkeys are fair. And they care about fairness, especially when they get less than others. Now, getting more than others actually is only the case in humans. So only us humans do feel uncomfortable when we get more than other people. And hopefully I've convinced you that fairness is good for us. Thank you very much for your attention.
Well, thank you very much, Michaela. That's been a fascinating talk. It shows how fairness is very much embedded into us, and it starts at an early age, and it's even in monkeys. I think that's absolutely fascinating. I didn't know that it was in monkeys. And we're now going to ask John Bird, the founder of Big Issue, to put a slightly different slant and perhaps suggest that fairness is not always good. So, John, over to you.
Hello, good evening. I think fairness is often a chimera, which is a posh way for saying an illusion. After the Second World War, in 1945, Churchill, who had brought Britain through the war, and nobody else could have done it, was thrown out of office because people wanted to have a different political regime, a different social regime. Winston Churchill was the person who dug Lord Beveridge, as he later became, out of obscurity. Lord Beveridge had worked with Winston Churchill and with, by the way, I'm not really going to talk about fairness, I'm just going to talk about what. So what I came down here for? 3.5 hours on the train to talk about fairness? That's unfair. So anyway, Lord Beveridge worked with Winston Churchill and Lloyd George in just before the First World War, when Winston Churchill and Lloyd George began the first semblances of copying Bismarck's and the Kaiser's, Kaiser Wilhelm II's welfare state. The Germans were the first ones to put it together, and we nicked a little bit of it because we realized that there was such a thing as social fairness, and you needed to give people who had been thrown out of work, you needed to give them some semblance of support, which would be fair, and if you were fair, you might avoid revolution. Anyway, so Beveridge gets dug out of obscurity and out of retirement by Winston Churchill in 1940, and the serious work of building the welfare state takes place. Serious work. All the stuff that eventually ended up as the welfare state. But it was Churchill, a vicious, nasty, right-wing piece of shit, which, as you know, is a technical term, as that's how he was described, does all this work. Because he believes that in the post-war period, people will be looking for fairness. And he was right. Then, of course, he doesn't get to reap the fruits of all the work that was done, and the Labour Party, who had some part in the welfare state because they were a part of the national government, take it over. No one's around to pay for it, so they have to ask the Americans, who we also loathe. We hate America because we know they're unfair. We know they don't have a welfare state. But what did the Americans do after the Second World War? They paid for our welfare state. They created our welfare state for us. And they created the welfare state in Germany. And they created parliamentary democracy in Italy for the first time, and in Germany for the first real time. And they did all sorts of things, even though they were an incredibly unfair load of people, because we know why they were doing it, because they were out to smash communism and have their own way in the world. Fairness is a very weird thing, because sometimes you get fairness given to you by the most unlikely hand. I believe that there's an obsession with fairness that gets in the way of logic and understanding. After the Second World War, we nationalised all of the industries that were crippled, with the exception of the railway industry, which had fallen to pieces in 1936 and had to be taken into government ownership. So the welfare state was created as this very, very fair thing based on American imperialism, paid for by American imperialism, and at the same time nationalised all these very, very poorly functioning industries, gave compensation to the former owners who had never made any money out of the steel industry and never made money out of the coal industry and never made money out of any of the other industries, even in the 20th century. So we built this fair thing on unfairness because we gave people money, shareholders, who had never had any money for a considerable period of time. So fairness, sorry, I've got a bit of a throat here, so please forgive me. Fairness kind of dies when you look at it in a kind of ideological, sociological, cultural and political form. What does the welfare state do? The welfare state does some fantastic things. It creates the National Health Service, which we know to be very fair. But why is the National Health Service unfair? Why is the National Health Service not a health service? Why is it a service that is about getting people back to health? Why is it that in 1948, when it started, I told you I wasn't going to talk about fairness. In 1948, when it was started, 40% of its budget was spent on prevention. And now, only 1% is spent on prevention. What is health? What is health? Health, the first prerequisite of health is look after yourself. The first prerequisite of health, dressed up in fairness, is to go to the doctor and say, look, I'm pouring this shit down myself, I'm putting this stuff in, and I'm eating rubbish, and I'm not getting my regular exercise, and I'm very unhealthy, so make me healthy. So what you're doing is you're masquerading behind a fairness, which is an incredibly dodgy fairness. Because when the National Health Service was created, it was created as something that would morph into a national self-health service. I was 2 years of age when they started the National Health Service. When I first went to school, I had milk poured down me, I had capsules shoved into me, I had my willy checked so I didn't have any illnesses. There was always somebody pulling down my pants. And it wasn't because they were perverts and looking up my jacksie, you know. Because they were trying to keep worms away, they were trying to keep dirt away. But actually, if you look at fairness today, the National Health Service is not fair. Because you will find that the people I work with die in an earlier, sometimes 15 to 20 years. They smoke more cigarettes, they drink more, they take more drugs. And yet, we still have this kind of strange world where we seek fairness. And I would say that often it is an illusion. And what we really need to do is to go beyond fairness. I'll give you another example. My father, God bless him, used to be a building worker. In 1961, he was earning £33 a week. And where was his son? His son was gamboiling in the countryside, costing the ratepayers and the taxpayers of Great Britain £62 a week. What's fair about that? A man is working his knackers off, supporting his 6 children, and yet a wastrel like me, who had spent all of his time shoplifting and housebreaking and stealing cars and daubing swastikas on churches and burning down stations, was off in the countryside costing a shed load of money, costing about £5 a week more than it cost to take people into Eton. If we really want to be fair, and I'm not suggesting you don't, and I'm not suggesting people are not into fairness, we have to start disentangling it. And we have to move beyond the appearance of fairness and look at the logic. a couple of weeks ago, I spoke on a platform. I think it was what was it? Crisis, you know, one of those lovely organisations there for the homeless. And I work with them and I love them to death. And I have no words said against them, except when I'm talking. But I'm not going to say anything. I'm not going to slag them off. Anyway, I was on this platform, and there was this bloke from Africa, works in Africa, and he said that they had to rescue this child in, I don't know, I forget the country, Zaire or something like that. But this child had been abandoned by his mum and dad at the age of 5, was wandering around, and came upon somebody selling loads of apples and oranges or something like that, mangoes, and hadn't eaten for 2 days. So he stole a mango. But he was seen by a man who owned the stall. And the man said, well, I won't tell you what he said because it was a bit rude. But he grabbed hold of him and he got a machete and marked his head, didn't go to the brain and didn't kill him, as a warning. If you want to steal, steal from someone else. The man on the platform was very moved. The audience was very moved. Everybody was very moved. And they thought it was very unfair that this child had been treated like this. And I was the only person who said, I can understand the logic of that man. He comes into this world to do one thing and one thing alone, which is to feed his children. And anybody who tries to take that from him will be cast into the hinterland. And this little boy was very, very lucky not to lose his life. Where's the fairness? We are always talking about fairness. We're never talking about the logic of poverty, the logic of feral existence. Feral poverty is terrible. And there's always someone moralizing about what the poor do to each other. The poor rob the poor. There are pure poor people. Never met them. But when we go on about fairness, we're extracting something that goes against reality. And what we really need to do is understand the logic of poverty. To understand the logic of where poverty leads people. And this boy got away with his life. And in the circumstances of that particular part of the world, he was very fortunate. Because here was a man whose job was to look after his family. And when you're poor, when the shit hits the fan, you will find all sorts of illusions about fairness and kindliness are ethereal. And they're really based, I would say, on well-fed people who can have a bit of space in their lives. And actually, the nearer you get to naked feral poverty, which is where most of the poor live, you get concepts of fairness going out of the window. I love fairness, I love fair trade. I love the idea of equality. I love all these ideas. But more than anything, I want this generation and the next generation to grow up and understand some of the terrible things that happen when you pursue fairness as some kind of absolute. The welfare state was created so that there was fairness. And then all those industries were kept going for many decades. Read my book, £5. It's the best book ever written on poverty, and is available afterwards. Read my other book, which is Why Drawing Naked Women is Good for the Soul, which is about using art to get out of crime, my own life. These are both missives on fairness, and I strongly recommend them to you. As I say, they're after. The welfare state was invented for fairness. Was it fair to take in industries and nurse them and keep people dependent when really they should have reinvented new industries? But they didn't. So Britain went down the tubes at the same time as other economies were rising because they were creating new industries. And then you leave the door open so that Margaret Thatcher gets into power and smashes the whole Victorian and Edwardian industries together. Smashes them up. And then when Lord Willie Whitelaw says to her, what are you going to do with nearly 1 million people, imitating Marie Antoinette, who said, let them eat cake. And there was no bread in Paris. She said, let them have benefit. The most fair thing on earth. And immediately creates the precursor of a whole underclass of people who were warehoused and put out of society, unable ever to function in society again, where only 1/2% of people from a social security background ever get to the university or the college. And 85% of our prisons are full of people who have come from a social security background. It's criminal. It's all been done because of fairness. Because we all said, well, we don't want people poor, we don't want them stuck in poverty. We've got to be fair. So we give them the means of tying them up forever. I have a brother who, I won't mention his name because he'd murder me. I have a brother, I have a number of brothers. I have a brother who, what? Some enchanted evening, you will see a strange... Sorry, she's waving at me. Anyway, I have a brother who hasn't worked for 30 years. He used to be a working drunk. He used to be a man who would be in the pub every night and at the building site at 6 o'clock the next morning. Working all day, never stopping until 5, and then going down the pub. And then 30 years ago, under the beneficence of Margaret Thatcher's distortion of that beautiful thing, the welfare state, distorts it so much that my brother can go to the doctor and declare himself depressed. And he has never worked since. And every time he raises a drink, it says underneath, sponsored by Her Majesty's taxpayers. What's fair about that? And yet, the welfare state was created because we wanted to be fair. We didn't want people returning to the hungry 30s. I would say, I'm not speaking against your motion. I mean, I didn't even know about this motion until I got off the train. But I was talking about what a beautiful place Plymouth is and how I want to live here. And go to the university, bring all my children. Anyway, but I do feel that fairness, when people go on about fairness, I think, oh, come on, let's get beyond fairness. Let's look into the entrails of poverty. Let's get people out of poverty. And let's not keep being simply superficially fair, dressing up things as poverty. I'm going to shut up. You can all clap if you want. Those who don't want to clap, don't clap.
Well, thank you, John. Thank you. That's absolutely fascinating. And here we have a very different view, that fairness isn't always good for us. In fact, it can be very bad for us. Now, it comes to that time of the evening, which is over to you, the audience, to ask questions, to make points, and I feel that there are many people here who want to raise issues. We have a roving microphone. We have one speaker over here. If we could just come down. That definitely isn't fair that she has to work this hard, is it? But then perhaps that's not such a bad thing. It's good for her health. There we are.
Thank you very much.
I have a question particularly
For
I think you need to turn the radio mic on. Sorry.
oh, sorry.
Anyway, I have a question particularly for Michaela. When you're thinking about these experiments, you see so maybe 40-50% of people like to share out equally, but then of course a lot of people don't. Is this basically a fundamental dichotomy between some conservative approach and liberal approach? And if so, why is it? Is this a permanent feature of people's personalities, or does this reflect how people interpret that particular situation?
Yes. Yes to all of it. So, thank you for your question. I hope everybody heard. Did everybody hear the question? Do you want to use the microphone? Okay, so I think the question was, is this difference between people sharing equally versus people sharing unequally, is that the fundamental difference between conservatives and liberals, or whatever we call them here in the UK? Is it a stable personality characteristics, or can we explain it mainly by how people interpret the situation? And I think the latter one I would definitely agree with. There's nothing in that situation, right? I mean, I gave you that instruction, and you probably imagined, even though I didn't tell you anything about the other person, you probably imagined something about that person. We actually tested that with kids. We let them discuss or tell us what they thought about, or who they thought that this other person is, and they came up with all kinds of things. They might be a person from my school, might be actually my friend, might be somebody from an ethnic group that they don't like. So yes, what we bring to this situation, how we interpret it, how we construct it, I would say strongly influences whether we share with that person or not. Somebody here mentioned charity before. If I would know that this person is needy, I might give all my £20 to this person. So yes, how we understand, how we construct the situation plays a role. Now, personality characteristics seem to play a role as well. There are things that people have looked at, like empathy. Am I able to imagine what the other person is thinking and feeling in that situation? Would I imagine if I was this person sitting there waiting for maybe something trickling down from the other decision maker's table, how would I feel about that? Would I be happy if I get half? Also things like emotions might play a role. Usually people feel really happy when they do something good to another person. Economists call that warm glow, and I think it's a really nice term. It's this feeling good about ourselves when we buy a big issue or give half. So yes, I suppose all of these things play a role to explain this difference. And just as for information, I didn't say that before, but people have done this game also and looked at political affiliation, or actually income. And the richer you are, the less you give in this sort of situation, which you can take this as you want.
John, would you like to just comment on that one?
Yeah, I think personality. I think a lot of it is class. I think a lot of it is social breeding or whatever. I think the Americans, for instance, are the biggest givers. They give more of their money than any other part of any other country in the world, then followed by the Germans, and I think we're third or fourth. And it is about getting up in the morning and people ramroding you on TV with, oh, please help them. Unfortunately, what's so interesting is that the more a nation gives, and the more the nation tries to be fair through giving, then often the nation is more likely to have the social extremities of a place like the United States and the UK, where you can have such abjectness. And it's so interesting in Japan. I've worked in Japan. They never really talk about fairness. They never talk about fairness. But it's probably the nearest I've ever got to seeing a fair working society. I'm not just talking about in the big issue Japan, but in some of the organisations I met, and they never talk about fairness. I mean, that is a country where, when we started the big issue, I wasn't allowed to talk to the father, because the father was older than me, who helped start the big issue, and his daughter would never question him. So this is a really hierarchical, you know, quite, by some standards, corrupt way of running a family, or sorry, running a society. And yet, there's so much more social inequality in Japan than I've seen anywhere. And fairness just doesn't get a look in.
Okay, and another question, I think we've got one here.
So I was just thinking about the end of John's talk about what fairness does to people. How basically, in many ways, there are a lot of people, no, in our society, we've got a welfare state, and it basically, if we abolish that, we'd be consigning a lot of people, due to the failure of our economy, to death. And so in that way, do you feel like the welfare state is like a luxury good that allows us to sort of like wash our hands in a way over all the needless deaths caused by our rubbish economy?
I'm really glad you said that. I believe that the welfare state is used by capitalism big time. It keeps the standard of living down because it keeps people down. It supplies an army of reserved, you know, the army of you know, the whatever that term is, I forget now. I think it does that. But I think one of the real things is, and this is my passion, I mean, I've come from 6 brothers, and I'm the only one who's posh. I'm the only one who got out. And I got out because of the prison system, which is very unfair. My brothers carried on being working class guys and died that way, a number of them. But the welfare state should be about, social security should be about social opportunity. And you can't actually get the Polly Toynbees excited about that. You can't get the Owen Joneses and all those other lefty liberal people who love fairness. You can't get them excited because they say, oh, you know, what's wrong with being working class? Or what's wrong with being on social security? And I say, try it. Try it. Mr. Blair, when he came to office in '97, a year later, declared to the world, we live in an age of giving. In the time that I've been in office, the amount of charities that have registered have gone through the roof. We live in this wonderful age of giving, of fairness. And I got a page from The Guardian that said, all right, if we live in an age of giving, doesn't that also mean we live in an age of taking? Have you ever been a taker? Have you ever been on the end of a handout? Do you know what it does to you? Does it take you anywhere? The welfare state is used against the people. And that's what I hate about it. I cry on occasions, I'm sorry to say, because I get very upset when I pull in at a filling station, as I did the other day, to fill up my car. And there is a young couple wearing dishevelled clothing, pushing a pram without a child in it, but loaded down with cheap food that they bought at the filling station. And they're walking along, and their lives are lost because no one has invested in them. No one has used social security to improve their lives. They haven't been given social mobility and social opportunity. That's why I hate most people who are kind. No, I hate them, but I mean, I wish they would be more profound. I wish they would give a hand up, not a hand out. That's what I'm obsessed with. And I think the argument about fairness is, you know, as I tried to say about the American things, the American paid for our fair system. So fairness often comes because behind it all there is a lot of unfairness for other people. And the reason we can go and have an onion or a lemon at a price which is affordable, or a dress, is because somebody else has been treated unfairly. And our kindliness, which grows from our being able to have a bit of space. I'm going on too much, I'm going to shut up. Sorry. I get lost.
Let me pass to Michaela, who's going to also respond.
Okay, I respond very, very quickly because I see another hand there. And gosh, I don't know how to answer your question. But what I would say, you were asking what happened if we would abolish the welfare state now. I mean, would there be thousands of people dying? I think John has alluded to that. There are some unequal societies, or societies that don't have such a welfare state as we do. The US is a prime example. But they do have a very strong charity and donor system. So I would, maybe from my research background, would say, if we would abolish the welfare state today, hopefully we would still have, or many people would still have, the sense of fairness to actually give to the ones who have less than they do.
So they still, I think the poor will still be dying.
Yes. Okay, now we've got two questions. We'll have the gentleman there, and then we'll come to you, all right?
John, I can't fully accept your generalisation about the welfare state, and I'm sure you want me to. And just mention my sister lives on Tyneside, special needs, married a husband who, through ill health, never worked, neither of them worked. One son works at Nissan car factory, other one at university, trained to be a nurse, another one, very poor eyesight, classed as almost blind, holds down a job. Welfare state certainly has done well by that family in its own way.
Isn't that wonderful? That's what the welfare state was invented for. The welfare state was to help those who couldn't help themselves. And because there are many, many people who don't need the welfare state, what they need is opportunity. They need education. They need social opportunity and social change. And because we don't give them it, and it was Thatcher, when she closed down those industries, didn't invest in them. When they closed down the Tyneside, when they closed down the big shipbuilding yards and the heavy industry and the steel industry, they didn't invest in them. And you know the bill for supporting the government subsidies was about that, and the bill for social security was like that. But they still did not invest in social change. What we need to do is take the able-bodied out of the equation and concentrate on helping somebody like your sister and your family. I bet you they are under-provided for. And one of the reasons they're under-provided for is because we don't have the money, because we're using the money to enslave people who should be at the college, should be being trained, should be moving on. And that is the great tragedy. And that is why I hate those, often the custodians and the guardians of the poor, who stand in the way of us. And that you leave it to these lot. You lead them into a trap. You lead people into a social security trap. The population of people taking social security went up 40% from 2000 to 2010. And you lead people into a trap. People like me saying, the government's going to run out of money and they're going to come after you. And they did. And now they're treating them like rubbish. They're doing the poor an incredible injustice. And that, to me, is criminal.
Thank you, John. Okay, now we've got a lady over here who wants to make a point or ask a question. The microphone is just coming.
I'm on benefits because I've got mental health needs, not because I'm physically impaired. I was sectioned, I was taken to Glenbourne unit, I've suffered sexual abuse, domestic violence, domestic abuse. Do you think I deserve to have money to support me till I can get back to some sense of mental fitness? That's a question to John Bird. I am able-bodied, but I have suffered sexual abuse, domestic violence, domestic abuse. I've been sectioned, taken to Glenbourne, and I've been put into the benefit system now.
I think you, as I said to this gentleman here, you're probably under-provided for. I know the mental health system, and I've been a critic of the under-provision of somebody like you.
I've only just come into the system.
But you will find that the help you're getting may be adequate, but what you really need is real help. And that means making an enormous investment in your well-being. And you can't do that when there's a government trying to dismantle the whole system. That's my argument. My argument is really, really underlined. There's a friend of mine who is my hero. He's an absolute hero because 10 years ago when his wife got MS, he gave up work to look after her. He saved the state hundreds of thousands of pounds a year. He's a hero. But does he get support? He gets a miserable amount, and they treat him like a piece of rubbish whenever he goes down there. Goes down to say, well, look, you know, he wants to take her on holiday. They won't let her take her on, even though it will improve his life and her life. They won't do it. And that is because they've turned a vast amount of people into dependence rather than turning them into independence, who are learning and earning and stepping out of poverty themselves. And that, to me, is I love the welfare state, but I want the welfare state for the work deeply for the people who need it. And I want the people who are stuck in it and they don't need it, other than the fact that because they haven't got a job or the skills. I think we need to skill those people. We need to make a vast investment in the poor, not at this time cut the way that they are provided for.
I've got a BA honours degree, so I'm not undereducated.
Yeah. All right. Sorry.
Okay, also very quickly to that. I think in one way I agree with John here is that maybe what the welfare state does is it's striving for equality, so everybody's getting the same. And because we have kind of limited resources, we go for the lowest common denominator, when actually, as John says, it might be more important to give people what they need. So different people do need different things, different people have more needs than others, so why not cater to that instead of making everything equal? So again, it would kind of fit into this notion. Fairness is not necessarily equality, even though that's what I talked about today, but fairness is also about giving people the need to get out of their difficult situation.
Thank you. We've got time for one more question. Have you got one more question?
She said.
Okay. Oh, no, we've got it. We just. No, but no, you say that. You just say it, and then we'll go to the question. Okay.
She said that pulling down the globalisation equivalent to the Berlin Wall was the most important thing, that she felt that we've got a business world that comes with no moral sympathy or honourable code of behaviour. And she said when that happens, God help us all. And that's what she predicted about globalisation, that there'd be no moral sympathy, honourable code of behaviour, and God help us all.
Well, thank you very much. That's an interesting comment, and I guess it's a comment about industry, not just about society, but about a particular part. Thank you for that. We have a lady in the middle who's just going to ask us a question now.
Hi, thank you. I'd like to ask John, please. What do you see as an alternative then? From what you're saying, I'm figuring that you're not wanting to get rid of the welfare state. You're just thinking it should work much better than it does. But what do you want to see in its place at the minute?
Well, I want the welfare state to be replaced by the welfare state. I want the welfare state to really work as it did in the period up until Margaret Thatcher, where there was much more per capita investment in people who fell out of work, in getting them back into work. I was always falling out of work. I'd probably do it 2 or 3 times a week. And I assure you that there was always someone, and it wasn't that there were a lot more jobs, there was just a lot more social training, a lot more technical training, there were technical colleges, there was investment in state investment, in apprenticeships and all sorts of things like that. I think that the welfare state was invented so that when somebody fell, they hit something that was more like a springboard or a trampoline, and it threw them up, rather than a concrete made safety net that when you hit it you were down and that was the end of it. So what I need is people to be angry at what Thatcherism did to the welfare state, because it really did it in. And it created this situation where we have these people who are outside of society and nobody's taking responsibility or nobody loves them. And that, I think, is an absolute tragedy. And the people who need it, the people like my brother needs a deep investment in psychological help to get him out of his drink and drug problems. They won't do that. And you know what I would do? I would say to my brother, you're getting it whether you like it or not. That's why I'm a bit of a right-winger. I don't believe in pandering to people. I say, look, you're killing yourself. Under the old Mental Health Act that was changed in 1985, you would have been sectioned. And I would take people and I would put them on a program. And I would really invest. And you know, when money is cheaper than it's ever been since 1793, it's a pretty good time. There's something called a sinking fund. That means you can borrow an enormous amount of money and sink it for 50 or 100 years. And that's what you can do. There's a way of re-budgeting so that we could have this money. We don't need to go through this strange world of austerity. Austerity, by the way, is too expensive because it always costs more than actually what it saves. And this is the record of this government. And it will be the record of the next Labour government if it says it's going to do what the Tories are doing. But we've got to have a welfare state. And let me just tell you something very boring that I tell everybody. You have to fare well on welfare in order to say farewell to welfare. I know it trips off the tongue. I've got a tattoo. Do you want to see it? No. Thank you.
Well, I think we've had a fascinating evening. I just wonder how many people here has views of fairness has changed as a consequence of the talks we've had this evening. Can I see a show of hands of people whose views have in some sense changed? And those of you whose views have not changed? Interesting.
No, I win. I win.
Well, thank you.
That's not fair.
Thank you very much for coming. Thank you to, first of all, to our two speakers. Thank you to John and to Michaela for giving two fascinating.
I'm not joking. This is really a fantastic book, and it's only a £5. If you buy it and you don't read it, and actually if you don't like it, I will give you the money back. There's just a 32-page form that you have to fill in. You send that form to me, and I'll repay the £5. And this one, which is about, it was full of drawings, full of my drawings, how I used art to get out of Nick and become the posh geezer I am now. They're beautiful. This one's £9.99. We couldn't charge 10 quid, and the other one's a £5. But you will get all your Christmas presents today. I've got a bag full of them. God bless you.
Thank you, and thank you to the audience. Thank you for your wonderful participation. Thank you for coming. And the next Cog Talk is in, I think, January. Is that correct? Yeah. In January. So we're not going to have a Cog Talk in December, but we will be having it again in January. See you then. Have a safe journey back.